Hello and welcome back, everybody. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of Around the World in 80 Teas. My name is Sharon Hall and I'm the Chief Executive of the United Kingdom Tea and Infusions Association. And today we will be talking about First Flush Darjeeling from India. I'll be here with my co-host Will Battle and our guests Rishi and Nick Gandon. Will Battle is a UK-based wholesaler and he's the author of the World Tea Encyclopaedia, which is a fantastic read for anyone who wants to learn about tea. Nick Gandon is the Managing Director of Reginald Ames Limited. He's a tea importer and blender, and also the MD of Mr. Ames Tea, a newly formed specialty tea brand. Nick has 25 years of experience of buying and blending tea, specializing in high quality products. Rishi Deb's career spans over 25 years in the international tea trade. Rishi is a master buyer and blender with the iconic British tea brand Twinings, and he has worked and travelled to major tea origins, including India, that we're going to be talking about today, where he worked for over 25 years. Rishi, Nick, and Will, welcome to this podcast, and I will hand over to you, Will, to get the conversation going.
Thanks, Sharon. Well, today we're drinking First Flush Darjeeling from India. And it's often referred to as the champagne of teas. Perhaps, Rishi, you can kick us off. Why do we call it the champagne of teas? What's special about it?
Oh, thanks, Nick. Sorry, Will. I was just going to say that both are iconic. Champagne is iconic. It comes from the Champagne region. It's sparkling and it's distinct. So is Darjeeling. It's distinct. There isn't another cup of tea to replicate it anywhere around the world. When we think about the distinctiveness, is protected. It's got a geographical indicator, and by that it means the terroir, whatever that makes Darjeeling unique, is completely protected. When we put it into context as well, because champagne is sparkling wine, it's about from a particular grape, and so is Darjeeling. Everything which makes champagne unique, everything which makes Darjeeling unique is very similar. But I would also like to state, whilst we kind of make the analogy with champagne, Darjeeling is unique in its own. So comparisons are good, but it stands tall on its own in the world of tea.
And we talk about flushes, and here we're talking about the first flush. Perhaps, Nick, you can give us a sense of what it is about the first flush that makes that really special.
Yeah, of course. Right the way through from end of the autumn through the winter through to the early spring, there's not been any plucking or tea manufacture going on in Darjeeling. So you've had this kind of winter dormancy of the bush, and you've got an awful lot of slow growth coming through. Come spring, so towards the end of April, the first buds and top couple of leaves are coming through. They're really, really fresh. So when those are plucked, it's then up to the skill of the guys manufacturing the tea to take that beautiful new fresh young leaf and bud and create it into a fantastic tasting tea. And as lots of the managers will say, it's really it's up to them to keep that level of quality right up there. The moment it's plucked, it can only go downhill. So it's their skill that then keeps it at tip-top condition. To then provide us with some of the fantastic teas we're tasting today.
One of the things that it always seems to me about Darjeeling, particularly the first flush, is the excitement and almost mania that surrounds the earliest batches of tea that are produced on the gardens. Rishi, I know you've grown up buying tea in the auction in Calcutta. And can you explain a little bit about what it is about the earliest Darjeeling invoices, the first batches that are produced, that makes them so sought after?
I would like to start where actually Nick left. You got to think about this, that you're coming out of dormancy. Sometimes, it's up in the Himalayas, pretty high up there. And the bushes have gone through a lot of stress and they're coming out of dormancy. And here it is, the freshest of the first spring teas. And therein lies the answer. Yes, we can draw lots of analogies when the next series of Apple Watches come out. people queue, or the next Harry Potter come out, people queue. And as you kind of alluded to, Will, I grew up in the Calcutta auctions, and it was madness, I used to think, when I first went in as a trainee tea buyer. Gosh, the Japanese are bidding absolutely ridiculous prices against the Germans and that kind of stuff. But yes, it is, the mania is because it's exquisite. Everybody wants that first, that limited edition, if you like, coming out of these exclusive 87 operational tea gardens. So yes, therein lies it. Who gets to the first sprouting of the spring, which is what people are after. And that's wherein the excitement is.
So in your view, is number one any better than number two or number three that comes out of the factory? Or is there an element of snobbishness about the securing the first batch that's come out?
I would answer it in a slightly different ways. Rather than saying snobbishness, it's beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. And number one actually is always a good number than two or three. But from a sort of a tea mastery point of view, I would say anything between a 1 and 5 is as good as it gets, because sometimes it all depends, as all these gardens are in different location, different ridges, and the flushes come in different time, if you like. Not that they are too widespread, but anything between a 1 and 5 would be pretty good. But it's the number one which is the most attractive one.
Other tea growing areas that are high, some even a little bit higher than Darjeeling, but there seems to be something about Darjeeling that makes it really special as a tea growing area. What is it, Rishi, about Darjeeling itself that makes it so distinctive and special?
I would start with the place itself, as you ask. Well, it's the tapestry of Darjeeling. It is quite unique in terms of its location, and it's about everything which makes Darjeeling. It's home to some of the world's highest peaks. It's home to oranges. People didn't know about that. People always associated with tea. It's home to one of the finest fighting forces in the world, the Gurkhas. It's home to a lot of sort of cultures. Where people know it for the Nepalese culture, but it's actually a boiling pot for Tibetan culture. The most famous son of Darjeeling, I have my roots in Darjeeling, as you very well know, is Tenzing Norgay, the first man to climb Mount Everest with Sir Edmund Hillary in the early 50s. And the most famous thing of Darjeeling, apart from the tea, is the World Heritage Steam Railway, which runs for 77 kilometers from the foothills of Siliguri to Darjeeling. And it's a magical ride. And the people, and all of that you put into that region of these 87 tea gardens, it makes it unique. Yes, altitude is a big factor, and I'm sure we'll talk about terroir as we go along. But my answer to that is the tapestry of life itself makes Darjeeling one of the most unique tea growing regions of the world. And I'm sure Nick's got a spin on this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you painted a very apt picture, Rishi. Darjeeling is simply beautiful. You fly into Bagdogra. Yes, you can have a fairly lengthy train ride up to Darjeeling town, or you can take your life in your own hands and jump in one of the trucks and travel along the very, very narrow roads where you have the rock face on one side and then the sheer drop on the other side. If you're lucky, there's a little bit of a barrier there, but the guys taking you up there, they know the roads like the back of their hands. It's a 3-hour, fairly hair-raising experience, but it's wonderful. And the higher you climb, the more greenery you can see out across the mountains. And then just touching on terroir, you as you're climbing up this mountain, you kind of go through this misty, foggy patch, and especially this time of year, you've got the hot weather coming off the Bay of Bengal to the east. You've got the cold weather coming down from the Himalayan mountains to the west. Where they meet, you get this thick, dense fog, and a lot of that creates moisture in the atmosphere. It keeps the temperatures cool, and that's part of the reason for the slow growth of the bushes coming through. You then have this land that was only planted out, I say only, it was planted out 150 years ago, but for thousands of years prior to that, it was all forest. And all of that forest is embedded in the soil. So when you talk about the quality of Darjeeling tea, it's all these nutrients that are being pulled up from the soil in a very, very slow manner. And it just creates this stunning, stunning tea.
You've both used the word terroir there. I mean, if that's a word that we normally associate with wines, and the impact of the environment on the grapes having an impact on the flavor of the wine. So it's the same for tea.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got to be thinking of terroir. You're looking at the climate, you're looking at the elevation, the rainfall, the sunlight, the temperature, the manufacturing processes. All of that goes into whether it's wine, whether it's champagne, whether it's tea, Darjeeling tea, Assam tea, all sorts of tea. All of that has a huge effect. I mean, the biggest effect on what it is that's coming out at the other end.
And Rishi, you mentioned altitude. Is that one of the biggest impacts on Darjeeling tea and its resultant flavor?
Yes, it is a big factor when it comes to Darjeeling. It is one of the highest altitude tea growing areas in the world. And as Will mentioned, there are others, but Darjeeling is quite unique. The other bit, if I may just add, is Darjeeling is quite unique in the sense that it's a system of ridges, and it's a very compact area, but you might be in a rain shadow area, or you might be on the other side of the ridge, and you might have a completely different tea characteristic coming. So every garden has got its own sort of signature taste during the period which we're talking about. And altitude, of course, plays a big role, but there are an infinite and a multitude of other factors.
So we're drinking First Flush Darjeeling. So from the first growth of the season. And perhaps you can describe what we're looking for in a First Flush Darjeeling. Nick, can I get you just to give what you would say should be the key characteristics of a good First Flush Darjeeling?
Yeah, a bright, clear liquor. So something that's, thank you very much, Sharon. Sharon is displaying a amber nectar, as it were. The taste profiles that you're looking for something that might be vegetal, it might be fruity, might be slightly citrusy. There are all these different characteristics that can come through from the different sorts of teas, the different jarts that are used, whether you're using Kombucha sinensis or Kombucha sinensis assamica to go into the first flush. So mine, for argument's sake, is a Thurbo, and that's a mixture of assamica and sinensis. And it produces this beautifully, wonderfully sweet tea. And so there's no single answer to your question, Will. I'm afraid so many different Darjeeling teas have slightly different characteristics, and you just have to be looking for whatever it is that you're wanting to follow through with. So whether you're looking for a fruity characteristic or a vegetal characteristic, they're all delightful.
Thanks, Nick. That's fantastic.
I was wondering, Will, if we could take a step back there, and if you could just take people through that the tea plant is Camellia sinensis, and Nick mentioned two different varieties there.
Yeah, so we talk about in tea Camellia sinensis, which is a bush that's originated in China. It's got typically a narrowish leaf, and if left unpruned, it would grow to a sort of medium height, whereas sinensis assamica, as Nick mentioned, more native to Indian borderlands with Myanmar, is a broad leaf, and you tend to get two distinctive characters of tea made from these two subspecies. But if you look at them from a distance in a tea plantation, they look more or less the same, but the taste can be quite different. And as Nick really correctly says, that it adds to the broad fabric of tea, and it creates these wonderful nuances and different flavors that you can get from neighboring gardens just across the ridges that Rishi described, and makes for an interesting variation in the product. And if I look at my First Flush Darjeeling, and perhaps Rishi, you can comment on this. First Flush style is quite light, and many people would look at it and think it's a green tea, but it's not. So perhaps can you give us some of the background on that?
Yeah, and this is where it becomes an art form, because you kind of look at that and then you kind of think, and it happened to a colleague of mine. I served the very first invoice from a garden called Shimong to this morning, and she said, am I drinking a green tea? And exactly to your question, no, it is a Darjeeling, it's a black tea, and you show this to the consumer, and they're absolutely surprised, and for the first time they're drinking it. And a lot of this is, and I kind of refer to this as the art form, and this is where Darjeeling tea is so artisanal, because tea has got its own process of manufacturing. This is about withers, and a lot of people think that this is also about hard withers and things like that, and that's why it becomes lighter. But this is where it becomes an art form with every estate manager or the tea maker, as we like to call them. Everybody's got those nuances, as Nick was talking about. And how do we make it lighter? And if you look at the picture behind me, this is not Darjeeling, but a plantation. But it's called so many different cultivars. It's about knowing your fields. It's what gives me that flavor. It's one of the things which we learned very early in our careers is blending actually happens on the field first, even before it comes to us. So they are blending different types of things. And how do we get that floral notes, as Nick was talking about? But a lot of this is around how do they wither the teas, which is a process of manufacturing, and how do we make it lighter? And Darjeeling, as such, just not for Darjeeling, but as a rule of thumb, and this is a ballpark thing, is the higher we go, teas become lighter, and the more we stay on the place, it becomes more viscous and thicker. But Darjeeling is in a unique place on the planet, and with all the things we were talking about, terroir, it all adds up to make this lovely bouquet of floral note which we get from the first flush.
So Nick, if you walk into a Darjeeling factory, what makes it what makes you know you're in Darjeeling? How is it special? What's different about it?
Well, first thing is size. I mean, if you think of maybe the plantation, we start off with the plantation. The size of a Darjeeling plantation compared to the size of, for argument's sake, an estate in Kenya or Malawi or somewhere. In fact, if you think of Darjeeling as a whole, there's 87 estates there. There's covering 17,500 hectares. One estate in Kenya, Kericho Estate, covers something like 10,000 hectares by itself. And when you consider that out of the 17,500 hectares that we've got growing in Darjeeling, we're producing 10 million kilos, where that 10,000 hectares in Kericho is producing closer to 30 million kilos. You get a feel for how the estate managers have to focus in on that quality. They haven't got the option of creating large volume because everything is so small, so much smaller. So they have to focus in on this quality. So first thing is the size of the estate, much, much smaller than any other tea estate you would see around you. And then there's the geography of it. You've got in Assam, everything's very flat. In Kenya, again, everything's very flat. You go to Darjeeling, you're up on the mountainside, so everything is very much on a large slope or several hills. Interesting to point out that any one Darjeeling tea estate could range in elevation from 3,000 feet up to 8,000 feet just on one estate. So we could be looking at blending teas for an invoice from teas that are grown down at 3,000 or 4,000 feet up to teas that are being grown at 7,000 or 8,000 feet. So when you're doing a day's production, first off, with the very early first flushes, there's a very small amount of tea that's actually coming into the factory. So it takes time to build that up. Go back to Kericho again, you've got the factory just churning and churning and churning. But in Darjeeling, you've got the factory, you've got the loose leaf coming in, and then it's got to be slowly manufactured. So the tea would then go into the withering troughs. Again, you'd have a much smaller withering trough in Darjeeling compared to some of these other estates. And then once it's been withered overnight, normally for the first flush, it then goes into the rollers. And you have these big, probably what, about 1.5 meters round rollers gently rolling the leaf to break the veins inside to release the juices that creates the oxidization to then make your black tea. This all then goes through the process, gets oxidized for a period of time, and then gets fired and then sorted and blended together to make your invoices. But I think the big takeaway home from that, Will, is really that it's just much, much smaller than any other tea estate. And it's much more, as Rishi pointed out earlier on, it's much more of an art form than a science. You're going to have the factory manager going in there every couple of hours, picking up the tea that's being withered, looking at it, is that right yet, for starting the rolling process. He's going in there looking at the tea that's been oxidized. Is that right yet to start firing? Because if it goes too far, he's going to lose the quality. If he does it too soon, it's not going to reach this quality. So they've got to be very, very careful about what they're doing.
Thanks, Nick. That's great. That really, I think it's great. You paint a lovely picture of the scale, and if you sort of, I suppose, multiply up the numbers, that's the whole of Darjeeling making about the same amount of tea as a couple of large Kenyan factories, and that really puts it into perspective that this sort of the artisanal level of the industry and the quality focus that I suppose they have to have given the yields.
And all of that plays such a huge impact on what the price level is going to do. So you can be looking at your Kenyan teas and paying $2 a kilo in auction. You can be looking at your Darjeelings, and as Rishi said earlier on, I mean, you might be at $100 a kilo for some of these first flushes if they went through auction. Yeah.
When you get to the bushes that you'd find in Darjeeling, Rishi, one of the things that I'm always told by Darjeeling planters is the age of the bushes in Darjeeling, on average, is they're quite old. Am I right in that? I mean, there seem to be quite a lot of very old bushes there with very small yields. Is that correct?
That is, as a general comment, that is correct, Will. And it's also, you know, if we kind of put it into the context for people who don't know, every tea plantation would have a replanting program, and it may run every 3 years, 4 years. And because of the terrain, which Nick was talking about, and it could be so varied, you could go from 3,000 to 5,000 to 8,000 feet. And the program to manage that is quite difficult. And some of the bushes, you're right, it's stating average age is over 140 years. That's almost touching the age of the industry itself. So, and at the tea planters, those of us who are close to it, is a really good cash crop. But the problem is the yields start dropping from 60 to 70 year onwards. So yes, the yields are very low. So we were talking about other comparative origins like Kenya. The yields are in high 8,000, 9,000 kilos per hectare. Darjeeling, and be lucky even if you touch 1,000. Compare that to Assam, which is at an average about 3,500. So yes, that is a issue, but I think that's been addressed from garden to garden. But we need to bear in mind that it is not an easy replanting program to have in some of these tea estates.
So the answer is that you should drink your Darjeeling, you should enjoy it, because the bush has had to work a lot harder to create your tea than an equivalent bush anywhere else in the world.
That's a really good spin. Yes, I agree.
And this is a wonderful tea, and it tastes wonderful. I mean, what would all of you think that this tea pairs well with? If we were going to pair it with a meal, for example, what would you eat alongside your First Flush Darjeeling? Nick?
I would strongly suggest something like smoked salmon and cream cheese sandwiches. I think that would go beautifully well together. Or if you're having a snack, I mean, what often happens up in Darjeeling, you might just have a shortbread biscuit. That works really, really well. And you can't go away from Darjeeling without having Momos, and Momos with Darjeeling tea. You just have to try it.
So for the uninitiated, what is a Momo?
Oh, sorry. A Momo is it's like a Chinese dumpling.
Wow.
Okay. So you can either have meat in or can have vegetables in. They're steamed dumplings, and you dip them in a sauce. They're fantastic. And
they go well with your Darjeeling tea.
They go well with your Darjeeling, yeah.
And Rishi, what about yourself?
I would agree with everything which Nick said. Is the hearty foods, or whole food, or curry, or a Nepalese curry, or an Indian curry, or a veg curry, whatever is your choice, traditionally goes very well with Darjeeling and afternoon cakes, carrot cakes. But in recent years, people have been quite experimental with other foods. There's a lot of trend happening, especially in this part of the world and in the US, about cheese pairings. So it just go very well with goat's cheese, the heartier cheeses, because it's quite a light tea. It just sort of it's the theory of either it complements or it's opposites. So it's a theory of opposites, if you like.
I would like to see this appearing much more in restaurants, and a cheese course that sounds fantastic, and then to have your lovely delicate Darjeeling tea at the end with your cheese would be wonderful. And I think we need to see more of that in out-of-home dining.
Yeah, agreed. It's also beautiful when it's iced. So if you brew up some tea and then let it cool, put it with some ice, you can even we've tried experimenting with blending it with strawberries and that kind of thing. It's stunning.
Wow.
It's perhaps also worth adding that, I mean, although it's black tea, it's quite a light black tea, and I know people who are lactose intolerant who still like to drink a black tea, but don't get on very well with milk in their tea, and that's also, it's a great fallback. It's really, you would never want to really use milk in First Flush Darjeeling. It just ends up looking grey. So also, I mean, it's a good day round tea. If you don't like to have milk in it, it'll perform well all times of day, just as a accompaniment to your emails and Microsoft Excel.
Absolutely.
A nice distraction. So if I'm new to teas and I'm trying Darjeeling for the first time, can you just take me through how I would prepare my Darjeeling tea?
Yeah, okay. I think the most important thing is using a clean kettle and fresh water. I'd even run the tap for a few seconds first. Boil the water, let it boil fully, allow it to cool for 2 minutes, and then pour it onto your tea. And I'd allow a teaspoon of Darjeeling tea per cup, which will be approximately 2 grams. I think, from my perspective, it's good to keep things simple and easy to help people try things out and get involved. And if you find that the tea is too strong, then use a little bit less tea or don't brew it for as long. If it's too weak, then do the opposite.
So rule of thumb, how long to brew it for?
About 4 minutes.
About 4 minutes. Excellent. Thank you. So, Rishi, we've been locked down for quite some time due to the pandemic, and at the moment, the only traveling we can do is armchair traveling, which I think tea is a wonderful way to do that. But when we are able to travel a bit further afield, would you recommend Darjeeling as a place to visit?
I couldn't recommend high enough. It's one of the most beautiful spots on the planet. We spoke about all the goodness it has, the natural beauties. Yes, and I kind of painted the picture on the tapestry of life. So yes, if you want to really savor the region, go on that train from the foothills to Darjeeling, pass through the highest railway station in India called Ghum. You pass through life itself because there's so much around the railways. And do read up about the Darjeeling Himalayan Railway. It's a World Heritage UNESCO site. It's been since 1992. Yes, Nick spoke about the momos. The food out there is absolutely glorious. There's something for everybody. If anybody wants to go up for trekking or go to the mountains, you can go to Sandakphu, which is a very world famous trek. You can actually trek to the tea gardens. And all the tea gardens itself, it's just become, over the last 10 years, it's become there is a lot of tea tourism which is happening in Darjeeling. So you can stay in one of the bungalows, you can book there and really experience tea in its totality, life on a tea plantation, how it's grown. And yes, there's so much to do in Darjeeling and surrounding areas. So absolutely can't recommend high enough. In terms of going there, I would always say don't go through the Indian monsoon season. Either go in the summer, or the best time to visit Darjeeling is in the autumn. So if you wanted a glorious view of some of the highest peaks in the world from Tiger Hill, which is very near to Darjeeling, get up at the crack of dawn and get there. And it's an absolutely breathtaking sight.
I'm absolutely sold. I can't wait to go. Thank you.
It's one of the great tea experiences, I think, to be woken with bed tea somewhere in Darjeeling from tea that has just been manufactured during the night, the evening before. So it's as fresh as tea comes. And then just to sit and watch the sun rise over Kanchenjunga, and from where you are in some of the gardens in Darjeeling, amongst some gardens like Lingya, and you can see the sun sort of trickling down the peak, like treacle down an ice cream or something. It's a beautiful sight if the sun's out and it's not foggy, which is a lottery. But it's a lovely experience, and if you can do it, it's definitely worth doing.
I think everyone at this moment is mentally packing their suitcases. So we'll take a little bit of a different turn now. We've been talking about First Flush Darjeeling, but that tea can be used to make another kind of drink, kombucha. Would you like to introduce that?
Yeah, I think one of the really exciting things in tea at the moment is that that interplay between tea and sort of craft brewing, and the no and low alcohol enthusiasm. And First Flush Darjeeling makes, along with a number of other teas, First Flush Darjeeling makes a fantastic kombucha. So we're going to try one and see how that taste of the early season light grassy notes, fruity tastes translates into a kombucha.
So, Will, can you tell me what kombucha is?
Yes, Sharon. So if you combine brewed tea with a bacterial culture and a little bit of sugar, then you get this developing taste, which is the outcome of which is kombucha. And it's slightly carbonated usually, and essentially it takes on the character of the tea that's been used in the brew, but there's also the nuance of how long it's been brewed and the temperature and the tea that's been used as the base. And in this case, we've got the First Flush Darjeeling, and if you smell it, you can still get some of those notes of the tea that's been used as a base.
It's quite exquisite. I mean, we talked about champagne and why Darjeeling is called. This really comes alive, and in terms of how First Flush Darjeeling can be used for a fermented, naturally fizzy drink.
Yeah, I think you can certainly taste some of that astringency of the Darjeeling in there, and I think you can recognise the lightness of the First Flush style in the drink itself, which I think is a nice. It's nice to sort of see the teas translate into the final product.
Yeah, it's incredibly refreshing, isn't it?
It's really, really nice. I've tried making my own kombucha in the past, and I've tried using a green tea, and I've tried using Darjeeling First Flush and some Nepalese teas as well. The green tea came out too astringent, it was too sharp. The First Flush and the Nepalese teas work beautifully well, just as this one is doing. They are, as you say, Will, it's got that lighter Darjeeling character you can still taste is there. The rest of the kombucha flavor profiles, the sourness will depend on how long it is fermented for before it's bottled. So you've got a balancing act of sweetness or sourness. And my understanding is that they, during that fermentation process, there's more of the bacteria is created the longer it's left for. So you have a slightly different flavor profile, but also more of that bacteria, of healthy, good bacteria coming through in the drink. So it's again, it's a bit of an art form to actually making it.
I sort of hope that what we've seen on craft brewing to an extent can translate into more enthusiasm for kombucha. And as you say, Nick, there's a artisanal skill in making something that firstly that people want to drink, and also that represents the taste of the tea that it started with. And that's a really exciting opportunity as more and more people become familiar with the taste of kombucha, to see that broaden.
We talked about pairing teas with meals. I mean, this would be fantastic in a setting with, fine dining, wouldn't it, to have during your meal, not just at the end? I think
Absolutely.
It would work well.
I mean, we talked about champagne earlier on. I mean, this is an excellent alcohol-free alternative. I'm calling it alcohol-free. There can be a tiny bit of alcohol in kombucha. I think we ought to note that. But on the whole, they're alcohol-free. an excellent alternative.
And I think the other aspect is that there are, you talked about the good bacteria that are involved in the process. There's a lot of research going on to try and understand the benefits of things like kombucha for our gut health, which are so important for overall health, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I think there's a lot more research to be done, but from what we've all seen so far, it looks very positive, looks very promising.
And there's a tiny little bit of sugar used in the process, but in comparison to your standard can of sort of fizzy drinks, it's really almost nothing relatively speaking. So
I want to say for about, I think it was about 3 liters I was making in a batch, and there was a couple of tablespoons worth in that whole lot. So you compare that to a 3 liters of champagne or wine or something else, it's significantly less sugar in there.
Why are we putting the sugar from a consumer point of view? If you think about it, is that is the feed for the bacteria. So a lot of that, you start with a lot of sugar, but it's actually gone. But when I say a lot, it's not a lot, but you start with this base level, which is higher, but you end up with a much less sugar, because that is the food for the bacteria, the SCOBY as we call it, which is actually helping to make the kombucha, the fermentation process.
So Rishi, perhaps you could explain to us what SCOBY stands for.
Yes, certainly will. So SCOBY stands for symbiotic culture of yeast and bacteria, or bacteria and yeast in that order. Just to sort of add the context of why do we use yeast, is we were talking about brewing a lot, and that is where yeast is used. So that is the context. So this is a colony of bacteria, if you like, and that is what is called SCOBY, and that's the full form of SCOBY.
Looking at the flavor profile of this one that we're tasting, it's got a real. When I first tasted it, I thought it was apple. Looking on the bottle, they mentioned rhubarb, and tasting it back, yes, I can see the rhubarb absolutely. Will, do you know whether or not is there a flavor that's been added, or is it just that? Or is that natural?
Yeah, Nick, it's just the 3 ingredients on the list.
It's amazing, isn't it? That you're absolutely right. It's a full range of flavors when you taste that kombucha. It's really interesting, and as you go through, I think you pick up different notes in there, don't you?
Yeah, you do, and actually, as it cools, sometimes you get slightly different notes coming through as well, which is also one of the great joys of any artisanal product as well. It's a bit like a wine as well. As it cools, you sometimes get different notes, and that's what makes it more interesting than just another soft drink, I think. Sometimes some of the oldest ideas are the best as well, and kombucha has been around for a very, very long time, but we're sort of rediscovering it over here now, and I think that's also quite exciting.
I agree absolutely. I think the market for ready-to-drink teas, cold teas in various forms, whether it be kombucha or iced tea or sparkling waters, sparkling teas, tonic waters, all these things, the market's ripe for it right now. Really exciting to see.
Rishi, do you have a view on the versatility of tea for product development?
Oh, definitely. I've spent my working lifetime in tea, and I work in new product development for the company I work for. But there is no sort of plant material, if you like, which is as versatile of tea. And we talked about the Camellia sinensis, the Camellia jart, if you like. I would challenge anybody to name me another plant species where you can have from the same plant so many different applications. I mean, we know that from the same plant comes black, green, oolong, name it, where it comes from. That's one level of versatility. And what Nick and Will were talking about now, taking it to the next level is make it more funky. And a lot of this stuff has been existed. Kombucha has been there for more than 2,000 years, and there's such lovely stories about it. But yeah, all that is actually applicable in new formats, and there's so many new sort of brewing technologies and things coming up. So tea can be applied from capsules to ready to drink to liquid forms of, in its traditional form in different shapes and sizes. And I mean, the world is our oyster, and I think people are rediscovering that. especially during the pandemic, I think we have fallen back in love with tea in a big way. And it's great to talk about it now that people have now seen the goodness of tea, because it is a very safe, good product, and it can also be quite a refreshing product. And now what we're talking about kombucha here today is it can be a healthy alternative to alcoholic beverages. And gosh, if to the uninitiated, you wouldn't even make a difference probably. Or I'm not missing my wine too much this afternoon because I'm drinking a lovely First Flush Darjeeling.
So kombucha is actually very trendy right now. Why do you think this is, Rishi?
I think it's about rediscovering ourselves a little bit in terms of our wellness. And the wellness agenda has never been bigger, what it has been for the last 3-4 years. And people are now looking for healthier alternatives. And it's especially in the case of kombucha, and we talked a lot about the probiotic effects. It is a very well-known drink in that respect, and it's been there for ages. And I think that is where it has really come into fore, that you can have a really good, refreshing drink, which is also good for you. And there's so much research, which we kind of alluded to earlier, it's all very well established. I think most of us understand now there is that connection between the gut and the brain, and kombucha sits in that quite firmly. And it can be also be fun, as Nick was talking about it. I can make my own kombucha. I can take my teas. I can do that, and suddenly I have my own sort of artisanal way of doing it. And there is that artisanal way of doing it through the microbreweries and using tea and to the hilt. If you were talking about innovation earlier. But it has got some purported health benefits, and that's been there since ancient times, if you like. And it's again come to the fore with the back of some solid scientific research.
So we're coming to the end of today's podcast recording. So I'll just ask each of the guests and my co-host Will to sum up their views on First Flush Darjeeling and kombucha, if you can, in 20 seconds. Nick, if I come to you first.
Yeah, of course. I mean, in terms of Darjeeling First Flush, I would say the takeaway from today needs to be try it. It's not hugely expensive to go and buy 50 grams of it. Give it a go. Don't be put off by the fact that it is so different and so new to you. Just go and give it a go. And likewise with the kombucha, if you don't try it, you'll never know just how good it is. So give it a go.
Thank you. And Rishi?
I would just add to what Nick said. It's one of life's pleasures. Go and enjoy it. And the great thing about tea is you can travel with the product. And we painted the picture about Darjeeling. Even if you never go to Darjeeling, drink one. It'll transport you back. Same with kombucha.
I absolutely love that. And Will?
Yeah, I think perhaps we just need to start referring to champagne as the Darjeeling of wines. And that's probably the best way of looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the perfect way to end today's podcast. I'd just like to thank all three of you, Nick Gandon, Rishi Deb, and my co-host Will Battle, for joining us on this stop on our Around the World in 80 Teas podcast series. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.